experienced a civil war between your heart and your head? You know, your head tells you to do one thing and your heart tells you to do something else. One pulls in this direction and the other in the opposite direction. Maybe your heart says, go on, take a risk. But your head says, no, too risky. I might get hurt. Or maybe your heart says, act now. But your head says, whoa, wait. Or maybe your heart says, go ahead, give of yourself. But your head says, better not commit. 21 years ago, I wrote down this story. So let me just share it with you. I said 3 weeks ago on a Wednesday night, we had not yet eaten supper since Jean and I came to church directly from work. We left church, we stopped at the house, we picked up our youngest son, David, who was 17 at the time, and we went to the Old Country Smokehouse on Highway 81. Remember that restaurant? By the time we ordered and had eaten and paid the bill, it was about 8:30 in the evening. The night was cold with that to-the-bone chilling upstate South Carolina rain, and it was coming down steadily. On the way from the front door of the restaurant to the car, I had an experience of one of those internal civil wars between my heart and my head. It was instigated by a dripping wet, bedraggled, brown-eyed beagle named Buddy, which tells you the rest of the story because we didn't know his name was Buddy. No collar, ribs sticking out, underfed, little patch of what appeared to be mange on his head, and smelling like a homeless, wet dog. With Jean and our son David pleading his case, I picked Buddy up and put him on David's lap in the back seat of the car. Now, with 2 dogs and 2 cats already then claiming 307 Cumberland Way as home, my head was saying to me, the last thing we need is another animal. We cannot take this dog home. But my heart was saying, look at those eyes. We can't leave this dog in the cold and rain near this busy highway. My head was saying, but we don't have room for another animal. We can't afford to feed another dog. Our vet bill is already the family's greatest medical expense. But my heart was saying, look at those eyes. My head was saying, well, what will we do when we want to go out of town on a trip? How are we going to find anybody to keep 3 dogs? But my heart was saying, look at those eyes. My head said, okay, we'll take him home for tonight, but we cannot keep him. But my heart was saying, oh, buddy, you'll never again be out in the cold and rain. My head heard a voice all the way from Indiana. The voice of my father saying, oh, you got to be kidding, another dog? And from the portals of heaven, I heard the voice of my father-in-law, Jack Barnes, say, you know, that Kurt is a fine young man, but he sure doesn't have much sense when it comes to cars and dogs. But my heart was saying, oh, look at my little buddy. Well, it's obvious who won. My heart and little buddy. Oftentimes, the most important decisions of our lives involve a battle, don't they, between our hearts and our heads. And it's probably a good thing that this battle goes on For if we heard only the voice of our hearts, well, our lives could be a journey of chaos, tossing us to and fro with every change of emotional wind. But likewise, if we listened only to the voice of our head, well, we'd function like a computer, pre-programmed without a sense of compassion or spontaneous joy. It is to this tension between heart and head that the Apostle Paul speaks in these words from his first letter to the Corinthians. Paul came to Corinth, according to William Barclay, shortly after his trip to Athens, Greece, where you may recall Paul stood on the heights of a hill called Mars Hill, and there Paul discussed the gospel of Christ with the learned philosophers of the Greek culture. It was there in Athens, Greece, where Paul had one of his very few failures. Paul had attempted to preach the gospel in terms of philosophy, and he had had very little effect. Barclay says after his experience in Athens, it would almost seem Paul had said to himself, never again. From now on, I will tell the story of Jesus in its utter simplicity. I will never again try to wrap it up in human categories. I will know nothing but Jesus Christ and Him upon the cross. To those who could only listen with their head, Paul's preaching sounded foolish. For in fact, the gospel of Jesus Christ, when viewed only through the lens of human reason, of common sense, of self-protection, makes little sense to us. If we were to consider the Christian faith exclusively from a practical standpoint, well, we might not even be here this morning. For how practical is it to follow a Lord who leads you by the way of a cross? How practical is it to prescribe to a way of life that says, love your enemies. Don't hate them, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. How practical is it if you only have 2 coats yourself and you give one of them away? After all, you might lose that first coat, you might need the second one. How practical is it to welcome a wayward child that's already squandered what you'd saved for him, and then when he gets home, throw him a party? How practical is it to welcome into your church little children who have no religious training, whose parents aren't going to come with them, who are more than likely going to make a mess and be restless and noisy? How practical is it to spend money on community outreach and missions when, maybe the furnace is going to go down? We'll need that money, or the refrigerator will go on a blink. How practical is it to start a church in a neighborhood that every other institution of society has left? How practical is it to open our doors to whoever would come and make them feel welcome? When all the church growth literature says people are more likely to come to a church where everybody's just like them. How practical is it to offer forgiveness when a friend or family member has hurt you deeply? After all, you have a right to those hurt feelings. How practical is it to feed hungry people, or give housing to the homeless, or to love and accept those who the world says they don't fit, they're not worth it? How practical is it for the God of the universe to offer His Son to the world and let Him hang on a cross? Just how practical is that? Not very. Not very. You see, Paul concedes that in the ears of those who measure the value of life in terms of profits made, or popularity contests won, or wealth acquired, or political power established, the gospel really is pretty much foolishness. If in the battle between the heart and the head you almost always follow your head, then I'll be honest, Christianity is probably a faith system hard for you to embrace. For the gospel is written in the language of the heart. Christianity is a religion primarily of the heart. It doesn't jive well with the wisdom of the ages. It certainly doesn't jive well with an era where the prevailing philosophy is you got to look out for number one. Or bigger is always better. Or show me what? Show me the money. Me, 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 me. In that sort of world, take up your cross and follow doesn't sound very appealing. But if we allow ourselves to be captured by the love of God, if we get infected with God's love, then the way of the gospel is the only way for true life and truth to be experienced. For when we surrender ourselves to follow Christ, it all begins to make sense. Now, if we wait for it to all make sense first, we'll probably never surrender ourselves to Christ. If we dare pay attention to our hearts and follow that tugging of our hearts, then we begin to see the world and ourselves in a whole new way. Suddenly you see we are disciples, commissioned to carry a message of good news. We become salt and light to the world. Suddenly the people around us, they're not a problem. They are God's children. And suddenly, this place where we are, here on South Main Street, it's not a bad neighborhood. It's holy ground in the kingdom of God. Listen this morning to your heart. What's your heart saying? Let God speak to your heart. Be careful, though. Let me warn you. If you listen to your heart, you might just end up with a buddy that you never expected.